Welcome to another DragonLance Saga review episode. It is Lenara's Guildember V. My name is Adam, and today I'm going to give you my review of The Rose in the Skull by Jeff Crook. I'd like to take a moment and thank the DragonLance Saga members and invite you to consider becoming a member. I'd also like to let you know that I've started a Patreon account. You're welcome to click the links in the description to learn more. You can even pick up DragonLance gaming materials using my affiliate links. This is my perspective only. If yours differs, I welcome all of them. Put them in live chat if you're watching it live, or after the fact if you're watching it after it's been live. That all being said, this is not a pre-written review. This is just me recollecting the story based on listening to it to and from my commute to work. Okay, so ultimately, this is The Rose in the Skull is about how Lord Gunthar wants the Knights of Solamnia and the Knights of Takhisis to merge together into a single knighthood and face off against the dragon overlords. It seems that the Knights of Takhisis are willing to do this, and we're presented with, so this is between the Chaos War and the War of Souls. Lord Gunthar Uthwistan is basically senile. He's falling into dementia. He's living in memories at some times. He's found this intimate connection with these gully dwarves who he's allowed to sort of live in the castle. One of them is named Uh-Oh and sort of calls Lord Gunthar Papa. This book is more about gully dwarves than it is about Knights of Solamnia or Knights of Takhisis. I just have to put that out here first and foremost. If you do not like gully dwarves, there is zero reason for you to ever visit this. The whole idea of the two knighthoods joining as one single knighthood is something that only is tangible in this story briefly, and then it just sort of gets thrown out for the other part of the story, which is the actual A story. And the actual A story is there's this original dragon, Draconian, from the original clutch of eggs when they were first created, this sort of misshapen, and it's believed he's an Aurak, but he's called like the old man or something like that. And anyway, they live on Sancrist Isle in hiding, and they had all these gully dwarves sort of build their keep for them. And their big plan is to work with Pyrothraxis, I think it is, who took over Mount Nevermind, or tried to. And anyway, is living in this area. I believe they're working with him in order to try to destroy the knighthoods once and for all. And I'm not sure there has to be some involvement with the Knights of Takhisis, but it's not really presented as like, oh, they were actively working against them with this person or that person. It was just sort of inferred at the very end of the book that they were actually also trying to defeat the Knights of Solamnia, but in a different way. And it all just sort of happened to be at the same time that this other Draconian group was trying to do the same thing. And so it just sort of happened at the same time, which is a little bit ridiculous, right? So Chris, thanks for tuning in. I'll get to all that stuff in a minute. Giggles the Clown, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. So the story starts as Sir Gunthar Uthwistan is sort of relaying a story about a gully dwarf, saying how noble and honorable they acted in some given situation, and all the other knights going, "Oh, poppycock, how can a gully dwarf be, proud?" And he's like, "Oh, you don't think he's honorable?" And he's like, "I'm going to make him a knight." And everyone's like, "You can't make a gully dwarf a knight." And there's this big conversation about knighthood and how different races are slowly becoming okay to be knights, and how, now females can be knights. And it's like this big, long, drawn out thing of people thinking that straight up Gunther is senile and crazy now. And he's leading this order of knights that seem to be going completely extinct. And he's doing his best to get his hands around and Liam Erling is doing his best to get his hands around not only Gunthar Uthwistan, but also the knighthood. And like, no, we have a legacy to protect. We can't start changing things so quickly that we don't recognize who and what we are anymore, because then we lose who and what we are. And there's actually a lot of truth in that idea which I really appreciate. Because let's just say, for example, the Knights of Takhisis and the Knights of Solamnia in this era is the Age of Mortals, whom the gods are gone. Both orders were formed by the gods themselves through inspiration. I mean, without the gods, what are they? They're just chivalrous knights. In the case of the Knights of Takhisis, they've fallen to being dishonorable rather than maintaining their honor. And so there's no reason for either two to exist in the face of this insurmountable force of the dragon overlords. And so the idea of combining them is kind of an interesting notion. And especially when you see how the individual Knights of Takhisis and Knights of Solamnia react to it. Because they're like, no, this is insane. Why would this ever work? And the Knights of Takhisis are seemingly more willing to join in because you can't ever trust them because they're Knights of Takhisis. So of course they have alternate objectives in mind. Anyone could have told them that. But anyway, the whole idea is that they're welcoming these knights in and they're proposing a joining of unions. As they're sort of discussing this and they're planning to take a vote the next day, the next day they go out and do a fox hunt or something, and a boar hunt is what it was. And so during the hunt, Gunthar ended up being killed, but it wasn't from a boar. It was actually from poison. He tells the Gully Dwarf a secret about like where his revised measure is or who killed him or something to that effect, and swears the Gully Dwarf to secrecy, and the Gully Dwarf runs off. Now the Draconians who actually architected the death of Gunthar, who are trying to do it in secret, are now off after the Gully Dwarf, which is the linchpin of the entire actual story. So the Draconians are trying to destroy the Knights of Solamnia by killing Gunthar Uthwistan, and then having the entire remaining Knights of Solamnia sort of disband or something like that in the face of leadership, because Lord Gunthar was going to revise everything. And so all the Draconians are chasing after the Gully Dwarf so he doesn't tell the wrong person and ruin the plans. And then we get tons of backstory on the Gully Dwarves, how they came to this island, how they were enslaved, and how they sort of took control of their environments, and how they live their lives, and how contented and happy they are. And I've always actually kind of liked Gully Dwarves anyway. They honestly kind of just remind me of like country bumpkins, just people who are just okay being who they are. They don't need higher learning. They're happy with the lives they lead. And this is just who they are, Gully Dwarves can't count higher than 2. So whenever there's a number higher than 2, it's 2 and 2 and 2 and 2, never really referencing the actual correct number, not even through addition. And so, I enjoyed the interaction, though I can understand if you don't like Gully Dwarves, how this whole, and the other Gully Dwarf novels I've read, I didn't enjoy very much either. And so I think the reason why I like this one is because of the character his connection with Gunthar Uthwistan, and the emotional connection, but the emotional pain is going through and sharing with the reader and the other characters in the absence of Lord Gunthar, in his death. And look, let's be fair. I think Gunthar Uthwistan is one of those Knights of Solamnia that deserves to be on a pedestal with Huma, Sturm Brightblade, and Gunthar. It used to be, Vinus Solamnus, Huma Dragonbane, Sturm Brightblade, and Gunthar Uthwistan. Because they are the ones that not only defined what it meant to be an honorable knight in the service of gods, paid it through self-sacrifice, helped redefine and reframe how the knights should represent themselves, and then ultimately redefining the measure for just that notion. And that's the whole arc of each of those 4 characters. And so I think Gunthar is integral to what it means to be a Knight of Solamnia, certainly in the Age of Dreams, but arguably also throughout the course of the entire saga, because of his rational mind, his rational approach to the measure, and his willingness to bend to logic, something that a lot of other Knights of Solamnia refuse to do abjectly. And so they create these characters that are seemingly one-dimensional Knights of Solamnia or Knights of Takhisis, and they actually infuse them, Jeff Crook does, with interest and motivation. And you start to actually see them as individuals rather than this amorphous, ignorant knight type character. And so even if you love the Knights of Solamnia or not, I think you would like this book simply because it's an interesting portrayal. It's about intrigue, and it's about traitors, and it's about subterfuge. I mean, it's a very interesting take on a novel when it comes to the idea of bringing these two knighthoods together. The person who manufactured that to happen dies under mysterious circumstances, and the remaining characters have to figure out who done it and why. And ultimately, it's all tied to this missing gully dwarf who goes off on his own little misadventure, finds this former priest of, it wasn't Chemish, I don't think. I mean, it wasn't Chemish. It wasn't Chislav. I think it was Habakkuk, or Habakkuk or Kiyojoth. I think it was Habakkuk though. Anyway, he was a cleric or druid at one time, and the gully dwarfs sort of take over his home, and he ultimately brings the hound of Gunthar's who survived the boar attack as well, and learns basically the whole story of Gunthar being killed and that these gully dwarves are being chased. And he finds out they're being chased by draconians, so he goes to enlist other people to help get them back to the knighthood so the knights can find out that draconians are behind it, and the Knights of Takhisis were never really true to wanting to be a part of this thing. And that ultimate reveal happens where there's this massive vote about the knighthoods joining, and even Knights of Solamnia agree that they should join into something called the Honorable Knights of Sancrist or something to that effect. And the Knights of Sancrist wouldn't have any hierarchy of leadership like the other orders do with their 3 different orders. Anyone that wants to be a part of it can be a part of it, and it's supposed to be based around the idea of honor and fighting for the people of Krynn against these alien dragon invaders in the form of the dragon overlords and stuff. I mean, I enjoyed the Knights of Takhisis. I liked their big bad guy reveals. I enjoyed the Aurak Draconian, one of the original, the old man character, one of the original Draconians that was sort of the architect of the destruction of Lord Gunthar on this isle without anyone knowing their presence was there. He ended up being a little sort of snidely whiplash as well when he's like turning against his own people because they dare question him. Any good leader, whether it's for good or ill, needs to understand that you need others to question your orders in order to verify that they are in fact good orders, especially if they're in your inner circle. Like, you just can't have yes men. Yes men lead to the nonsense we see in today's world. You have to be able to have a healthy back and forth with those you trust, whether it's family members or friends or coworkers or bosses, in order to have good outcomes and thoughtful and meaningful outcomes. So that part kind of bugged me. But, you know, ultimately it was Knights of Takhisis, Knights of Solamnia fighting against each other, but also independently working together in order to uncover, or to not only uncover, but defeat this new received threat. Some of the Knights of Solamnia changed over to the side of the Knights of Takhisis, and they had this big battle at the end amid each other, which was sort of terrible. And then, of course, the infiltration and capturing and escape against the Draconians and their little fort when they were trying to rescue these gully dwarves, and this wonderful rousing speech about how they wanted to rescue, but some of them were like, it's only a gully dwarf, who cares? And they're like, only a gully dwarf. And they brought up the idea of Tasselhoff Burfoot being a little person having to do big things. And he's like, are gully dwarves any different than Kender or any other people of Krynn? They're small too. They have a role to play. And that role that Tasselhoff played ended up changing everything and saving countless lives. So how can we ignore this little person as well? And it was a speech that actually roused me, that actually made me feel for this character, reflect again on the nostalgia of Tasselhoff, who at this moment is believed to be dead. And you really start to think, no, you know, as much as the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, it's the little people, the seemingly insignificant forgotten people that ultimately have real meaning and shape the world that we live in through their actions. And it even brings up the story of Bapu in Raceland Majir, and how gully dwarves are of significance and that they have their place on Krynn, and they're not just throwaway characters, that they are effective and they are thoughtful. And simply because they are portrayed in a manner doesn't mean that that's the totality of who and what they are. I'm reminded of when I was in the military, there was this female NCO who was talking a bunch of shit and sort of being kind of rude to some of the other soldiers. And then afterward, one of these soldiers was complaining to her officer in charge. And he was repeating what she said in the Southern accent that she had, as if that Southern accent indicated her level of intelligence, as if she was stupid because of the way she spoke. And the commanding officer was very clear. He's like, look, just because you speak in that accent doesn't mean that she is stupid. And she's a highly intelligent human being that you need to respect on the basis of her being a human being. And on top of that, she's your non-commissioned officer. So you have to respect her with that in mind as well. And just because you disagree with her doesn't mean that she's stupid. And just because she has an accent doesn't mean she's stupid. And the soldier felt kind of stupid himself for even having brought it up in that way, as if that was an indicator of intellect. And I've never stopped thinking about that moment of simply because someone presents themselves in a way that you may perceive as being less intelligent or less effective at any given task, it doesn't mean that they are any less intelligent. They may just not be familiar with the task, or they may just be happy with who and what they are, and they're not trying to impress you. But that is no indication of their value as an individual at all. And I really see Kender and Gully Dwarves like that, and Dragonlance has done, I think, a wonderful job of showcasing that it isn't true that they're insignificant simply because they may be perceived as being dumb or trash or thieves or whatever it is, that they are genuinely significant characters. I mean, in the case of Tasselhoff, he literally saves the world over and over and over again. But also just as individual characters in the world, they are of substance and significance. And we can actually roll that back to our real world in a very tangible way, and just don't treat people like fucking idiots simply because you disagree with them or simply because they're making choices that you would not have made. Their real world experience may differ from yours, and that influences why they think the way they do. We have to be much more open to hearing perspectives in our real lives than we are. And I think this story is a really wonderful way of framing that idea of seeing someone and not judging them based on how they appear or what they're doing, because there's something else inside of them that is motivating them to make the choices they are. And we should maybe consider that before we just condemn someone, just off the cuff or something. Anyway, that's what I took away from the Gully Dwarf inclusion in this. There's a nice little scene where Crysania appears at the funeral of Gunthar, but ultimately the funeral felt a little hollow compared to some of the other heroes' funerals. Gunthar Uthwistan is a big character. He's not a throwaway tangential character. If it wasn't for Gunthar, Sturm would never have been a squire. Ever. He would have been thrown out and just ostracized and probably put to death. But Gunthar's the one that kept him alive and put him in charge of the High Clerist Tower, working with the Knights of the Crown. Gunthar's the one that took inspiration from Sturm's behavior and voice and changed the measure and indelibly changed the knighthood forever because of it. It was Gunthar that did that. So he, I think, should have had infinitely bigger. Of course, the events of the world right now are such that you don't really get a chance for these characters to convene together in these memorable moments. You know, I mean, most of the people are gone from the War of the Lance at this point. Most. Goldmoon could have made an appearance, but she didn't really have any interaction with Gunthar Uthwistan. The elves could have made an appearance, but right now they're being governed and controlled by Dark Knights. Most everyone else is dead or ostracized. You know, Lorana could have made an appearance, which I think would have been of import. She didn't. I'm trying to remember where she is at this moment, because I don't think, War Souls didn't happen, so she's around. So she definitely should have shown up. He is the one that gave her the title of Golden General and put her in charge of the forces of Solamnia, which ended up winning the damn war. So she should have been there in his last moments. But this book is, the events are all sort of background to the true purpose of this book, I think, which is the framing of Lord Gunthar's life and the impact of his death and the legacy of the Knights of Solamnia moving forward. Because obviously the Knights don't join into one Knights of Sancrist order. Obviously the Knights of Takhisis were trying to just destroy the Knights of Solamnia in addition to the Draconian horde. Obviously it was never a good intentioned act, except for on Lord Gunthar's part. But his senility wouldn't allow him to see through the clear deception. And in any case, Liam Erling ends up sort of becoming the de facto leader of the Knights of Solamnia in the absence of Lord Gunthar Uthwistan, and they give over Castle Wistan to Utto and the Gully Dwarves, which I think is a beautiful gesture to be overseen by one of the former Knights of Solamnia, who is this really interesting character, Lady Jessica. We get Lord Gunthar really proving the honor of Gully Dwarves and the value of the little people of Krynn. We get him revising the majority of the measure, but Lord Liam Erling, it really has to do the hard work himself and buckle down and actually finish the revisions that Lord Gunthar had started with the measure. And when he does finish it at the end, he doesn't let anyone know that he had anything to do with it, for the legacy of Lord Gunthar. So it's really, this whole book is about paying Lord Gunthar's legacy off. And I really like that. And there's this beautiful moment at the end where Utto just puts his hand on Lord Gunthar's body and says something like, Papa gone, or miss you Papa, or love you Papa, or something like that. And it's just heart-wrenching, because this is a character who everyone else mocks, everyone else made fun of. And Lord Gunthar treated him like a regular person, like a whole person, not a fraction of, a bad trait of a person like most people do. And then ultimately gave him a home for him and his clan because he valued what they brought to the table. And I thought that was absolutely beautiful. I thought it's a nice stepping stone for the Knights of Solamnia from huddling in Sancrist in almost total defeat on the world from the Dragon Overlords and the Knights of Naraka to pushing out into Solamnia and stretching out to Sanction. I mean, they did a really good job of, from this point, not in the story, but after the story, really getting their power back as a knighthood. And it's because of this revised measure, code in the measure, that Lord Gunthar and Liam Erling put together. And I thought this novel did a pretty good job of framing that. And I really appreciated it for that. So if you like Knights of Solamnia, if you like Gully Dwarves, if you like, that sort of Knights of Takhisis deception and draconian, general spy thriller type story, I think you're going to dig this one. So I would definitely check it out if I were you. All right, let's look through some of these questions here. Surprisingly moving. This made you love Gunthar even more. He remains the most underrated character in the saga. Yeah, I think so too. It was sad to see Gunthar ravaged by old age and loss of his family, but the fact that he was trying to set up a knighthood for future success was beautiful. I agree, except that he actually tried to change the knighthood. In addition to fixing the Knights of Solamnia, he also tried to like unify them in the Knights of Sancrist. I thought that was ridiculous. You'd have liked seeing more legacy characters at Gunthar's funeral. Yeah, for sure. Chrysania's speech was nice. I agree with you. You like seeing all the female knights, unlike Shadow of the Dragon Queen. It felt earned as it was a direct result of Sturm and Lorana, along with Gunthar philosophy. Yeah, that's something that I really wish would have remained intact in 5th edition amid all of the other lore elements that were just stripped away with 5th edition. Knights of Solamnia is a male organization, intentionally, by design. Women were brought into it late in their lifespan, arguably at the end of the lifespan, because of how Lorana acted and Sturm acted. That's why women were allowed into the knighthood. And so, and you couldn't even be, even if you were a man, you couldn't be a Knight of the Rose unless you were from a noble Solamnic family. And so that was even a hereditary based act. So it wasn't just men, it was only wealthy, rich, powerful men that could become the Knights of the Rose. And so it all changed because of Sturm, Lorana, and Gunthar, and only them. And Tanis's inclusion as an honorary knight, Caramon's inclusion, it invited all sorts of stuff. At the very end, Lord Liam Erling was inviting a dark elf to be a member of the knighthood, which is just an ostracized elf. And Dark Elf Valian basically said, look, if you do this, then you're going to lose the Elven Alliance that you've built up. So I'm not going to do it, because my inclusion in this knighthood is not as important as the knighthood moving on and the relationships that you have. And Liam was like, yeah, I knew you were going to say that, but I wanted to make the gesture because I do think that you deserve to be in this knighthood. So other races are starting to be admitted into the knighthood as well. It brings a really interesting, and even Gunthar was pontificating on the idea, or maybe it was Liam near the end, on the idea that, well, maybe Kender will be Knights of Solamnia, which made me think of the 5th Age game that I ran with Chris and his Kender Knight wannabe. Like, what if he could actually be a real knight? All right, so let's see. Could Gunthar have tried the Legion of Steel to ally instead, or were they not interested enough? I don't think the Legion of Steel, they're a spy organization. They're not like out, as it were. They work with trying to liberate areas and stuff, but they're not like an overt organization that takes over areas, even though their headquarters is in Solace. They don't really run Solace. And because of that, Knights of Takhisis, they have Palanthas, they have Quillinesty, they're in positions of power around the world strategically. The Knights of Solamnia are just trying to convince them, thinking that they're still the honorable knights that they claim to be at this Dragons of Summer Flame era, wants them to unify against this greater threat. The Legion of Steel didn't want anything to do with either of those sides, ever. That's why they're a different entity. And so that's why I think that they never reached out, or they never would reach out, because it's just a different type of organization. It's not like a strict knighthood, Our Draconian was awesome character. The first attempt as a Draconian that was flawed but pure would make for a great PC or NPC in a game. I liked him too, but he did, again, he was a little snidely whiplashy at the end, I think, when he was like, I'm going to kill my new general or something like that. I don't know. I think there should be loyalty amongst the ranks, especially even if they question you, because they're clearly still following you. They just want to make sure that your decisions are sound. So just give a little justification other than, I said so, and that's why you should do it. Are you questioning me? How dare you? Like, no, just explain your plan, dude. And then they'll be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. All right, let's do it. It's that simple. I don't know why bad guys have to, or good guys in positions of power have to act like they should never be questioned. It's ridiculous. So this had some epic lines such as, "Why do we fight if nothing changes? That's exactly why we fight. And heroes don't fly on dragonback anymore like Huma. They fight with swords and political gain, with words and political gain." Yeah, the Knights of Takhisis had a lot of really great lines in this. I like the whole fighting thing as well. This book had a lot of really good stuff going for it. And it made me really appreciate that it was written and that I read this era. Because when I first heard that Gunthar wanted to unify them, I was like, what the hell is going on? This is nonsense. But actually reading the story, I was like, okay, I can see it. I understand. I don't agree with it, but I understand, where he was coming from. The author nailed the landing. You were genuinely moved by the Gully Dwarf Uh-Oh's reaction to Liam's gift and his overall relationship with Gunthar. 100% same here. It was heartbreaking to see Gunthar as elderly with his mind addled, but it was real and integral to the story. And it was real because it happens to us, because many of us know someone who is of a certain age that they start to lose their mind a little bit, and it's maybe not full-blown dementia or anything, but you start to forget things or you just drift off into memories and stuff. And it's a devastating situation. And if you have to live with someone like that or take care of someone like that, it can be very challenging. And I liked seeing a character that wasn't just like fight till their deaths, someone that had survived it all and just withered away, and how that is still tragic and painful. Let's see. You love that his legacy was creating a revised measure that honored the lessons learned. You like the storyline of Gunthar wanting to join the forces of the Knights of Takhisis after they joined forces in the Chaos War. Let's see. I think I got it all. Anik, wannabe knight, is close to being canon now. Yeah, as close as it'll ever be. So anyway, thanks for all the comments and stuff. I do think this was one of the more interesting, not the most interesting, of the Bridges of Time novels. I'm going to be reading Desra's Quest this coming week, so I should have that review for you next Sunday. I'm not really looking forward to that one at all. But again, if you like Knights of Solamnia, Takhisis, if you want to hear about how Gunthar tried to unify the two knighthoods, if you want to hear about Lord Gunthar's death and his legacy, you've got to read this book. It's worth your time. Definitely check it out. But that is my review for The Rose in the Skull by Jeff Crook. What did you think of the story? Was it logically presented with the idea of the two knights joining? Did you believe in the motivations of the old man, Aurak Draconian, and the Knights of Takhisis trying to come in and destroy the Knights of Solamnia from the inside? Let me know in the comments below, or you can always email me at info@dlsaga.com. I would like to take a moment and remind you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, ring the bell to get notified about upcoming videos, and click the like button. This all goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. Once again, I'd like to let you know that I've started a Patreon account. If you appreciate the various products I produce, I'd like to invite you to consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Thank you for that consideration. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of DragonLance Saga, and thank you for joining in that celebration. So for DragonLance Saga, until next time, my name's Adam Slanjavar.